From KPRC2, this is Houston Newsmakers with Cambrell Marshall.
An historical marker by the Texas Historical Commission now stands at the spot on the eastern edge of Memorial Park, not far from where soldiers from the 24th Infantry, assigned to guard Camp Logan's construction, were camped. On the night of August 23rd of 1917, more than 100 soldiers left that camp and headed toward downtown Houston. By the end of the evening, 11 locals and 6 soldiers were dead. It became known as the Camp Logan Mutiny, but my guest this morning might dispute that label. Professor Drew Brenner Beck, a 20-year Army veteran, is a law professor at South Texas College of Law. John Haymond, also an Army vet, is an historian who has worked with Professor Brenner Beck to petition the Army for clemency on behalf of all of those convicted. Good morning to both of you. Thank you for being here. How do you tell people about what led up to this night and the legal process now that's playing out?
Well, one of the most important things about a contentious history like this is to always place it in its proper context. We can't look at the events of August 23rd separate from everything that leads up to it. Texas has been the scene of at least 5 major incidents of racial violence between black soldiers and white citizens in the years leading up to this point. And this is coming on the tail of one of the worst race riots in American history, the East St. Louis Massacre, which would only later be eclipsed by the Tulsa Massacre in 1921. There's a climate of racial violence, and it's particularly directed against black soldiers in America at this time. And that's the setting in which things come to a head in Houston that one very hot August night.
So when the dust had settled, the Houston Chronicle of August 24th said it all. 17 people killed and all 11 white civilians, including police officers. And as you can imagine, the hunt for justice by white Houston was swift. And within a very short while, the next day, in fact, all of the men suspected of being involved were disarmed, rounded up, and shipped out of town to await court-martials. And it was a swift justice that brings us to Professor Brenner Beck. Professor, you've said that convictions were technically legal, but not just. What do you mean by that? And what were some of the biggest problems with these court-martials?
When I say it was legal but not just, it complied technically with the 1917 Manual for Courts-Martial and military law of the time. Mm-hmm. When I say it was not just, there is a litany of causes that we have presented to the Secretary of the Army to include the fact that all 118 soldiers in these 3 back-to-back capital murder trials were represented by one defense representative who is not a lawyer. That was legal in 1917, but it certainly was not intended to be implemented in these types of trials with this number of defendants. Mm-hmm. The particular defense counsel obviously couldn't represent all of these soldiers with varying defenses, different alibis, different alleged roles in the events of that night. Mm-hmm. And the defense counsel was actually commended by the prosecutor in the case for always keeping the interests of the Army first and foremost, rather than raising the racial strife and divisions that had caused the trouble in Houston that night.
And to this day, I'm told that at that time, that was the largest criminal trial in history. And I know that we have pictures of a church that they had to use a church venue because it was the only place big enough to hold that many people. So to this day, some of the challenges about that, when you see all these people, was that part of the clemency request as well, showing how they could not have been properly represented?
I think that was key to the clemency petition, as well as the fact that the military lawyers who were prosecuting the case and the Board of Investigation who investigated the events engaged in coercive interrogation that was contrary to military law at that time and violated the rights of these soldiers.
I know that this was one of the things that about this was a really fast process from August of 23rd to December 11th, when not only had they been court-martialed, but on the morning of December 11th, 13 of these men were taken out and hanged with no real notice. It just happened, and they buried them in unmarked graves, really, except they put the numbers on there. Is that all part of the process as well? I mean, does that have anything to do with your appeal about how quickly this was all done?
Not necessarily the quickness. I mean, courts-martials at that time were designed to be expeditious resolutions of alleged criminal misconduct. But the fact that in this case, these soldiers had no time to prepare. The defense counsel had approximately 10 days to prepare versus 2.5 months for the prosecutor. He had no assistants to help him prepare, whereas the prosecutors had the entire board of investigation. There were 2 lawyers who were working together on this case, as well as the entire command of the Southern Department of the United States Army.
And so with all of that in mind, that goes into the clemency request as well. What's that process? How long is it expected to take? And what do you say to the people who say, well, you know what? There were 11 civilians who were killed that night, and these people couldn't be blameless.
Well, let me address that first. The petition goes out of its way to acknowledge the deaths and the woundings. We had people who were maimed that night as well. We're not saying that criminal acts did not occur. They did. But the way that the Army chose to try these cases by trying the soldiers for mutiny, which is a conspiratorial liability, so if they're part of the mutiny, all of the soldiers were liable for all of the violent acts. They gave away the opportunity to determine which specific soldier may have actually engaged in the criminal act.
I want to, John Heyman, you're an author and historian. How do you write this story so that it ends the way it should end?
First of all, by trying to understand the perspectives of everyone who was actually involved. This is not a history that's just about data and dates and numbers and who died. This is about the men and women who were caught up in this event and whose lives were forever changed by it. And so trying to write this is a delicate process because we're trying to give resonance to voices from 105 years ago whose stories have either been misrepresented or neglected altogether. And fortunately, I have been able to talk with descendants of the families. I've been able to work with incredible legal scholars like Drew here. And I think together we're able to pull in the complete historical narrative to a greater degree of accuracy than has ever been managed before.
Drew, how soon do you expect to have an answer?
Hopefully soon. We know that the petition went to the Army Board for the Correction of Military Records in January and came out with a recommendation in May. We don't know the recommendation, and we were told about a month ago that it's on its way to the Secretary of the Army's desk for a decision.
Well, we look forward to hearing what that decision is. Thank you for starting this conversation here. A lot of people don't know about Camp Logan, but this is one way to get it started. Professor Drew Brennebeck, thank you. John Heyman, thank you so much for your time. Hopefully we can discuss more of these topics in the future. We will continue this topic today, though, however.